I really made a mistake in the 10 years that I served here officially by not really, I would go to Richard's meetings, especially at the country club, the big meetings, but I didn't really reckon with what an influence Richard was having on many, many people whom we knew. And now I get to sort of recover my tracks, and I'm so delighted. By the way, do you realize that almost everyone here, with a few exceptions, is wearing blue today? It's extraordinary when you look at that. There's an old story that Judith Anderson, the English actress, was addressing the Royal Academy at a formal dinner, and she said, "I see that among the distinguished assemblage, one of you has his cravat slightly crooked," at which point every single hand went up. I didn't sell that right. What she said was, "The most distinguished man in the audience has his cravat crooked," and all the hands went up. But I'm human, and I missed the joke. But the joy of being here, and I do know a number of you from many different venues, and I'd like to speak today about a couple of things related to the last third of life. In that book that I wrote, I basically describe the first 18 years, or finding who you are. Who in the world am I? Starts as a baby, and then by about 21, in many cases, you sort of are as an ego, you're sort of established. And then the next third, you're sort of, it's you and me against the world. It's the ego, it's Paul against circumstance. And that's when life is very challenging and stressful. Marriage, God willing, children, job, career, who in the world am I, disappointments, failures, losses, and you're in the middle of the winds of life. And it's a time when you often kind of miss reflectivity because you just can't. You just got too much going on. I see it in our sons, and you see it, and some of you have grown children, you see it. And they're almost heedless to the big issues of life because it's just hanging in there. Go to La Paz restaurant in Crestline around 4 o'clock or 5 any Friday, and you'll see about 30 really stressed men with their sort of blithe and somewhat stressed wives not talking to each other and covering over their lack of relationship by over-attention to their children. La Paz at 5 o'clock is a perfect picture of the second third of life. I commend it to you. And then you suddenly get to your 60s. Sometimes it happens earlier, 60 to 70, and all of a sudden your things have changed and you're drummed out of your work. Even if you're good at it, you often are pushed out, sometimes earlier, sometimes later. The marriage is different. The financial things are often altered, and all of a sudden you're kind of on the beach. You're kind of washed up in a way. We used to talk about Hilton Head, and I said, "Well, what's Hilton Head like?" I would ask my friend Frank Limehouse. And he would say, well, all the men there have recently retired, and at least a third of them have a stroke in the first 6 months, and a second third has a heart attack in the second. And so you have tons and tons of unaccompanied older ladies in places like that. Now, remember what the old man said, it doesn't really matter what a speaker says for the first 5 minutes. I could read the phone book and it wouldn't matter because, you know, you're eating, you're thinking, who is he? What about his voice? Am I able to connect at all? So all of those little words were just a way to begin to break the ice as I speak about a couple of things about the last third. And what I'm going to do is give you a sort of fundamental presupposition and then 3 observations. A fundamental dynamic about life in general, and this comes from the Bible. This comes from the Christian faith. This is not some broadly observed humanist phenomenon. A basic dynamic of how life really works with people. And then I'm going to make 3 observations about life in the third third of life. And if you're in the second third, of course, that's great. Maybe you'll hear it. You won't. By the way, if you're in the second third, it's very unlikely that anything I say will make sense, but you might recognize it later when it will make sense. The great dynamic in life is that all creativity and fruits of the Spirit and works of love and activity that has any lasting value emerges from prior love. The root of any real active, purposive, and effective service results from prior love. It, on its own, it will inevitably fail unless it is motivated by something that's happened to you that causes you to change and want to love or express or be fruitful outside. And that is a universal premise. In my opinion, there are no exceptions to it, except if you're pathological or an axe murderer, but only 1% of us are that. And the dynamic of life is that fruitful work, and this goes back to college, goes back to the second third, but fruitful work and effective love comes from belovedness. Belovedness is the first thing before you can love. Now, you think about that. I'm putting that out as a dynamic. And it's rooted in the Bible. Todd Liscombe, who teaches a wonderful Bible study here, I think about 37 Bible studies, something. But he gave me this wonderful Bible. And he says in 1 John, we love because he first loved us. And John repeats that. In this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. And that's in 1 John 4. And that's just a dynamic I ask you to think about. If you have been truly loved, especially in your misery, or at a point of despondency, or at a point of real, you're at the bottom, which happens at some point to almost everybody, and somebody has come alongside you and altruistically evinced genuine personal affection and caring for you, that has the ability to change a heart and a life unlike anything else. And the key text on that is Dean Martin, who in 1950, I saw a few heads rise, he did a song, you can look it up, it was the #1 hit, if it matters, about 1954, and it's called You're Nobody Till Somebody Loves You. And I'm just going to read the first 2 verses of it. It's a really touching song. You're nobody till somebody loves you. You're nobody till somebody cares. You may be king, you may possess the world and its gold, but gold won't bring you happiness when you're growing old. The world still is the same, you'll never change it. As sure as the stars shine above, you're nobody till somebody loves you. Now, I like to mine, M-I-N-E, popular culture for universal wisdom. And you all get a great deal of it, especially in rock and roll. About 70% of all rock and roll songs are true. They all have to do with this. About 20% are ridiculous, and about 5% are obnoxious. But the vast majority of rock and roll songs, whether you grew up in the 40s or the 50s or the 60s, convey the idea that I love her because she loves me. So that's the first point. In other words, they went to Sir Stafford Cripps, who was a labor educator in Clement Attlee's labor government right after the end of World War II, when the conservatives under Winston Churchill, believe it or not, had been kicked out. It's hard to imagine, but they had been. And Stafford Cripps's labor left-wing government had one internal contradiction. Many early laborites were devout Christians. They were not Marxists. They were socialists, but they were Christians, whatever you make of that. And at one point, the extreme left wing of the Labour Party came to Sir Stafford Cripps, who was a very imposing sort of miner from Nottinghamshire. And they said, we have to get rid of Christian education in the schools, because they used to have mandatory Christian ed for all the children in the state schools. Said we have to get it. We can Teach these children to be responsible, decent, fine citizens. Just, we don't need to have the religion. And he said, to their great surprise, you can't do it. You can't, it won't work. You can't have the fruit without the root. It's one of the great lines, and he was I'm talking about a significant left-wing figure, but whose Christian faith made him realize that he couldn't instill young people and children in his country with doing what he regarded as good without them having a foundation in the gospel and the grace of God. That's Sir Stafford Cripps. Now, I'd like to talk about just three kind of observations about what it is like to, I guess, to sort of grow old. And one of the problems about growing old is you can't help it. I hate that. Your body will, in fact, signal to you, unless you're a rare person. I met a man recently who's 80 years old, and he's a physician and he's a surgeon, and he's still acting. He said, it's unbelievable. He said, I'm 80 and I still have no tremor. He can actually do surgery even though he's 80. I'd never met someone over the age of 68 or so who is a physician who still practiced right in the heart of it. But he was, as he said, I don't understand it. It's very, very rare. But I have no tremor, and I seem to have no nerve diminution, even though I'm 80 years of age. But most of us are caught by our own bodies. And our wives, God knows, all they do is think about their bodies. Men do, but women really do. And you're suddenly caught. You think of yourself as still athletic, or you can still run, or you can still play a game, or you can do this. And then all of a sudden one day you collapse. Or you get an indication that something is acutely wrong. And you don't want it, but you have no choice. And so when you grow old, there are a couple of thoughts that come to me about that phase. The first is there's an appropriate disillusionment or devaluation of much of what you did before. Now, I don't want to sound at all dismissive of anyone's life's work, because we all have done it, and we've all been sincere. I think almost everybody in this room has sincerely wanted to do something worthwhile in their career. But what happens is that there's no question it happens. It happens on Hilton Head Island, obviously, but it happens everywhere, is that you often begin to see that many things that you thought were worth doing seem relativized. They just don't seem that important. It's not as if you decided to write it all down, but so many things that you regarded as crucial. I can just name a million. You name them for yourselves. But there's kind of a devaluation of especially career and some relationship matters. And you begin to see, I had a couple years when I was really involved emotionally with what I was doing, but an awful lot of the time I was treading water. Or a lot of the time I was just so darn in a state all the time about where I was going in terms of ambition that looking back on it now, I wish I had gone a different way. Again, I don't know about you, but there are men who look back upon their career or their life, and they wish, in fact, it had been spent doing something else. There's a novel from 1932 by James Hilton, who wrote Random Harvest and Lost Horizon. He was an English novelist, and it's about a clergyman who's wrung out. He's a Baptist minister in northern England, and he's just wrung out by his life. And he wishes he'd taught music. What he really loves is music. And the whole novel is how he realizes that he didn't do what he did something because he thought people wanted him to do it, but he really wishes he'd done something different. And he has to wrestle with this, and in this case, tragically. But just ask yourself for a minute, how do you evaluate what you've been doing in the second third of life? It may be that you were just like Martin Luther. Anything wouldn't, as long as you were working and doing something with joy, that was fine. But a lot of people are doing things that when they look back on it, they're, why did I do that? I once I once told somebody that I had a great ambition to get a certain job in the church. And I'm so embarrassed now because I wanted this job more than anything else in the world. And as people later on told me, there was no way in a million years that someone with your convictions is ever going to get that job. And of course, it was a ridiculously high-profile job in the world's terms. And I never did get it. And I probably spent 10 years sort of pseudo trying to get the job. I mean, I never said it, but I always wanted to get that particular job. And everything I was doing inside was kind of a constant turning, the wheel in the sky, like Journey. It was a wheel in the sky. And I look back upon it now, and I'm not only embarrassed, but I feel that a lot of time was wasted when one could have done something more germane or more deeply important. So think about that. There's an appropriate disillusionment. It's not a dissing. I'm not here to diss anybody, but there's an appropriate devaluation of a number of things you did. And sometimes there's a revaluation of things that you could have done. And occasionally you have the chance to, in later life, redo some things. And I think it's never too late. Now, that's the first thing, an appropriate disillusionment. The second thing is you start to think about heaven. Now, again, you may say, well, I'm not thinking about heaven. I'm nowhere near wanting to do that. But it's really important that everybody does. Think about what will... You see, my wife Mary often says that really this life is in fact about getting prepared for an eternity with God. It's not really about fulfillment. You may disagree, but that's what she often says. And she will say the great thing about thinking about where you're going when you're dying, I'm speaking as a Christian, is that the great thing is what won't be there. Think of all the things. Now, first I talked about disillusionment from career and the things you were doing. Now I'm talking about the next destination, which is important to think about because it's amazing how many people are suddenly taken. It just is. It's amazing how many people you love are here one day and not the next. It's amazing how you can suddenly find yourself at UAB in the ICU. God forbid, but it happens regularly. And Mary often says, the great thing about heaven is what won't be there. And what she means by that is all the baloney and the process and the emails and the input and the updates that won't be there. For example, no one in heaven will ever ask you, do you want a receipt? That will never happen in heaven. What we go in life, we go these things, it used to be paper or plastic, it was beta or VHS, all that kind of stuff. Now it's do you want a receipt? Or I don't know if you've been in a restaurant, obviously you have many, many times recently. If anyone one more time is getting ready to serve me, and as they're putting the plate in front of me before I've even seen it, what do they inevitably ask you? Is there anything more that I can help you with? I mean, it just kills me. That will never happen in heaven. I just want to say, you're a robot. This is 1984. Who told you to say that? Do you want a receipt? I want to punch the person. Is there anything more I can help you with? I say, don't you understand? I haven't even seen it. Come back in 10 minutes and be a good server. But they never do because it just destroys. And one thing will definitely not be in heaven is gas-powered leaf blowers. That is the worst thing of all in our current culture. I'm amazed. I mean, I've lived in many parts of the world. You know what's interesting? I go to Europe too much, and you will not hear a gas-powered leaf blower in any European country. Not that it matters, but it matters a lot to me. Germany, I was there recently, no gas-powered leaf blowers. We were in England last week, no gas-powered leaf blowers. And there are no more leaves. And we were in France, none. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was in heaven. So you think about the things in your life that are basically nuisances or just intrusions, and the internet is the main form of it today. You can't even write a message to someone you love because you'll get a reply too soon. I can't stand it. I will literally not write messages now because I know I'll get another message that I'll feel I have to respond with a thumbs up. Obviously you don't have this problem, but And my friend Don Menendez says sometimes, he said, one of the things, and it's a little heavy when he says it, about heaven is there won't be any sin there. Imagine the kingdom of God where there are not only no robotic people speaking to you, but there are no leaf blowers, but more importantly, there's no self-serving. What a remarkable world it will be where there is no self-aggrandizement, where there's no envy, where there's no hurt feelings, where there is no active behavior that hurts. And I think Mary is right that when you think about where we're going, imagine what won't be there. And that is something I wanted to leave you with. So I've talked about an appropriate devaluation. It doesn't mean that what you've done isn't important, but there's no question when you're in the, I was in South Carolina for years, and I'm very much aware that Clemson and USC have a very powerful competition, right? We used to say that Clemson University was a contradiction? But I would find that when I was with people when they were extremely ill, I never once heard anyone speak about Clemson or USC. It was striking, and I cared, but at that point, what? All that mattered was the wife or the husband holding your hand and maybe a word of hope that this wasn't the conclusion of the ending of the light of love in your life. Now I'm going to say one more thing and then conclude. Mary said recently, because she's been thinking about this a lot, my wife, the closest we know here about what heaven will be like is earthly love. Now, that raises a very big question that I seldom talk about because it's a little bit hidden. People get nervous about it, but it's, in my experience, is absolutely the case. Something that bugs a lot of men as they get older, but they very rarely say it, except occasionally to me when things are really rough, because they're afraid it will offend the person they're living with. Sometimes old girlfriends or lost love has an enormous weight in men as they're older. Now you may say, that's not true of me. I challenge you. I'd like you to see Summer of 42, that movie. Because what I find is, you see it in literature, you see it in movies, you see it in pop songs, is that often if there was a loss or a rejection or a disappointment in romantic love when you were a teenager, it has this extraordinary ability to monopolize your inner life right up to the end. I've seen it many times. I don't know if you've read Gone with the Wind recently, but when the Vivian Leigh character, Scarlett O'Hara, is dying in Gone with the Wind, she starts saying, Philippe, Philippe. And Mama, Philippe is not her husband, and she dies. And Mama, who she won an Academy Award for her performance, says, who is Philippe? And no one ever finds out who Philippe was. But the author tells you who it was. It was someone that this young woman, who was happily married for many years with great children, someone that she had known when she was 16, and she'd never shaken it. And I do want to call this a kind of an unusual aside, but it's intimately important. Think about an area of your adolescent or later romantic life where you're still carrying a wound, and if possible, deal with it. Now again, it could be nobody here, but almost everybody is. I want to give you two examples. Do you all remember the Moody Blues? Well, please. I had the honor 2 weeks ago of meeting and seeing Justin Hayward, who wrote all their songs. Every song they wrote, Tuesday Afternoon, Days of Future Past, Nights in White Satin, Story in Your Eyes, Question. I mean, he's 80 now. And all his songs are about, everyone, are about a crisis of romantic connection that went wrong in early life that he cannot heal. And it's very important, especially that men, because men process these things differently than most women, if you have a kind of recurring, unhealed loss in that department, it's crucial that you address it. And I talk to people about it all the time in prayer and confession. And this is his autograph. Justin Hayward in Atlanta 2.5 weeks ago gave me his autograph. Are you kidding me? I'm burying it in the columbarium at the Church of the Advent. But it's right here. And he said, I said, why do you always think about these things? He said, well, I don't tell anybody, and I'm very happily married. He's been married for 45 years to an Italian lady. He said, but something did happen when I was 18 that I've never been able to quite shake, and it's at the bottom of every Moody Blues song. So, we're in London a week ago, and this is stuff, but it's important. The Deep Blue Sea is a play by Terence Rattigan that was made in 1952, and it's been made into 4 movies, The Deep Blue Sea. And it's about a woman who's committed suicide. It's been revived, so we saw it a week ago, and it's magnificent. And it's about a woman, in this case, who's lost the unfaithful. She's been unfaithful to her very successful husband, and she's shacked up with a man with whom she's truly in love, and then he rejects her. And it's unbelievably bracing, and she commits suicide, but she's rescued about 5 minutes before the gas and from the stove. And it's a play about how does she find her way through a romantic rejection, and she's like 48. And what happens is, basically, a physician is the Christ figure, and a physician happens to be with her and helps her connect with her loss, and she is saved. It's a remarkably true and yet redemptive play. You can look it up, The Deep Blue Sea by Terence Rattigan. Well, that's the last thing I was going to say. I talked about devaluation, which sort of happens. I talked about, except for about 1 out of 100 successful men, there are a few successful men who go to their death thinking that the most important thing is being numero uno in whatever field. And they are the most obnoxious people you have ever met. But 1 out of 80 is that way. Second point was heaven will be marked by an absence of the things that make our lives, for the most part, interrupted, stressful, and really 80% doing unimportant things. Not 100%, but 80%. And then the third thing is that if there is a point of romantic loss or rejection that still seems to pop up, it needs to be addressed, because what will happen is you'll be in the hospital and suddenly you'll raise up in the middle of your last days and you'll say, Susan! And Linda, your wife of 50 years, and your children, who are now 40 and successful in their careers, or hippies, they will say, who was Susan? And Susan was the one that you didn't really relate to God as a healing moment. So let's just say that the last little word is the secret of being older is being a sailboat rather than a motorboat. In other words, a sailboat is a boat that is pushed and pulled and moved by the wind. A motorboat is and if you're a powerboat or a motorboat, that's fine, but you'll end up inevitably crashing, going the wrong place, or running out of gas. But if you're a sailboat, you're in the hands of God, who does in fact have your best interests at heart. We've learned this in the Bible. And then you'll often be led. Even it may be a strongly active 10 years, in fact, but you'll be led rather than trying to do it yourself once again and being marooned on an island in the lake because you ran out of gas. Thank you so much. Dear God, separate the wheat from the chaff. If there's something that has helped anyone here, deepen it and strengthen it, and help us to focus on what's really important at this point in our lives and to prepare for an eternity of peace and joy and fulfillment and belovedness with you. And we pray that for the sake of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.